To reiterate, I am now recording this meeting. Those who do not wish to should hide their face by turning off the video. Those who do not wish their name to show up should put a blank name in or something non-distinguishing. If you do put a name, I do prefer your SCA name. That way I call you and remember who you are. But if you have no name, I will make sure to call you as best as I can. This session is about being the Earl Marshal, and it is aimed at the Kingdom of Onsteora. So folks are aware, each kingdom does their marshallate differently. The one thing they have in common, and it's the only thing they're guaranteed to have in common, is they have an Earl Marshal. It is one of the great officers of state. What that means is that that is where the buck stops within the kingdom. That group of officers, including the Seneschal, the Exchequer, the Herald, all have the ultimate authority. The Earl Marshal is one of the few officers that actually has a published handbook that is part of kingdom law. Our Marshal Handbook, because of the way it's done at society and within kingdom, it is published as law. It will be appearing in the next newsletter when it comes out, because we just did a change of law to simplify it. For those who want to carry it around on paper, it will now fit on a single sheet of paper. And that is for all marshallate structures. Because of that, I am the ultimate person in the kingdom that interprets martial law. When we have questions of what the rules are or what a rule means, I'm the one that people go to determine that. I generally, if they come to me before going through one of my deputies, I generally bring in that deputy to discuss it with. That way we're both on the same page when we make the ruling. It's generally not a big deal. It happens more often when society rules changes, just like they did in the last year. So there's been a few interpretations of what was meant by some of the changes, particularly with regards to some of the steel combat and the rapier rules changes. The others haven't had anything of significant change. If it comes down to an issue that extends outside of my office of law, I work in as a peer with the Kingdom Seneschal on those activities. So when I publish my handbook, it is signed by myself, the Kingdom Seneschal, the Sovereign, and the Consort of the Kingdom. That is the gist of law. What I'm going to do now is to share a screen after I get it to the right size. To show you the org chart of the marshallate within the kingdom. That one. All right. Can everyone see that okay? And I'll assume silence is good unless I hear otherwise.
So you can see it.
Okay. So because of how the SCA is structured, I am appointed by the Crown of Onsteora. I am then approved or denied by the Society Earl Marshal. I actually have a warrant signed by those individuals. That is different than the other officers within the marshallate. Only the great officers of a kingdom have an individual warrant signed by the Crown and their upline counterpart. The Society Earl Marshal has his deputies that are topic specialists. Those are laid out here. They actually do not have any say over the marshallate within our kingdom, except in the case of a potential interpretation or misinterpretation of one of their handbooks. Our marshals do send a courtesy copy of their quarterly reports to them. but in the end, all of it comes from me upwards. So if one of the marshals is not doing their job, I file their quarterly report for them. My deputies are not warranted by society. They are warranted like all other officers within the kingdom below the great officers. They are assigned every 6 months at round table. That is good for 6 months. We generally say appointments are for 2 years. That is the maximum allowed in Onsteora without a specific extension to the warrant. But it is done 6 months at a time. So if at 6 months we do not renew your warrant, we are not officially firing you. It's a very careful society legalism. We are just not renewing your warrant. There are many kingdoms that do the same way for that same reason. Because of how the sanctions process to remove officers works, most kingdoms do that for simplicity when you have a borderline performance case as opposed to a clear, distinct performance issue that you have to terminate someone for. For borderline cases, we figure we can make it through up to the next warrant to deal with that. So of all these officers within the kingdom, the Earl Marshal is the only required office. The others, while very important to the kingdom, are not mandated by society, nor even the kingdom. They are called, everyone below me that's on this is called a lesser officer of state. That includes my direct deputies as well as regional officers. Local officers are branch officers as defined by kingdom law. With regards to the structure, I probably ought to color code this to make it easier for folks. But the armored marshal has a quarterly report that goes up to the society armored marshal. They oversee the regional armored marshals. The regional armored marshals oversee the branch marshals. That is the same on the rapier side of the house, but they have an extra deputy at this time for cut and thrust. That is a convenience for that office to have someone focused on that in order to help grow the activity. And I just realized looking at this, I am missing a deputy, and I'll cover it towards the end. The equestrian marshal, they are the last one that came into our warranting system in the kingdom. They report up to society. That position is currently vacant to be filled at the end of this month. And the missile marshal, we did this actually many moons ago when I was actually the first person put into that role. It was done for convenience for the Earl Marshal to have these 4 marshal activities have a single point of contact as a deputy for the Earl Marshal. So the siege marshal, the combat archery marshal, target archery marshal, and thrown weapons marshal report to the missile marshal, who then reports to the Earl Marshal. These have at-large officers that may be helping them with regional areas, or branch officers for those groups that are large enough and have regular occurring. They do not have a regional structure like the armored and rapier do. To clarify, equestrian is the same. It has authorizing marshals, and there may be 1 or 2 branch officers that go in and out, depending on local activity level. For youth, we have 2 separate offices for that. We have a youth rapier and a youth combat. That was done historically because of the difference in them, and they had originally reported up through the respective rapier or armored marshalate venue. I don't have the right word for it. but they are now separate, and they report up to society now that society has that. While they are my direct deputy, they're courtesy copy to society when they do their quarterly report. For hire and fire authority, for everyone that's on this within the kingdom, I am the person who does the appointments because their warrants come from me. I do that in consultation with either the Miss Earl Marshal for these down here, Armored for regional, Rapier, etc., as well as the current officer who's holding the role. We have 3 specific offices, one of which I mentioned earlier is missing from this chart, that are specialists. The Marshal Web Minister, who helps maintain the Onsteora Marshal Authorization System, as well as working with the Kingdom Web Minister on the WordPress site that we use to publish data. We're actually working on doing some enhancements to that with reporting forms with the Kingdom Web Minister at this point. I have a deputy specifically for helping with the roster warrants and helping people get authorized and maintain all the data associated with that. That is the Marshal's secretary. Many kingdoms have this type of role. They may call it different stuff, but almost everyone has that just because of the sheer volume of paperwork involved with maintaining a system with this many different combatants, this many different authorized, warranted people, etc. The other deputy I have that's not on here, and I'll get this corrected when I publish this out on the website, is I have an experimentals deputy marshal. They work with any of these different subject matters in order to evaluate and track experiments that would be going up. So they worked with the Rapier Marshal on the rubber tip spears, for example, to make sure that they were documented consistently, reported up, making sure they're safe. The current person we have in this is actually a materials expert, so they help evaluate different things that come up. I sent them on a rabbit hole at one point of evaluating the Zoom bang that has been considered equivalent to rigid and what that means with regards to other alternatives of that. Unfortunately, it came back with not enough information. We're going to have to evaluate it on a case-by-case basis, but they evaluate things like that to help be a subject matter expert for things that could be safety oriented and to make sure we track them properly. Any questions about the org chart? All right, with regards to this, there's one more thing I will talk about, and that is the warrants. In addition to the people on here and the local branch marshals, we have what are called warranted marshals. Those are people who are authorized to authorize combatants or other marshals with regards to being on the field, running lines for archery, helping with games for equestrian, stuff like that. So those authorizing marshals and all the people on this must be paid members. That is a requirement to be on the warrant. That also means that in the role of your position that the SCA insurance covers you. I am not aware of us having a situation where that's had to happen, but it is an absolute requirement by society that anyone who is on the warrant, and thus, in addition to these folks, the authorizing marshals, because they are making decisions with regards to safety, have to have a warrant and must be a paid member. And we check that every 6 months when we do the roster. All right, that's it about the org chart. So I'll stop sharing. The next topic I'll talk about, which is sort of related, the opposite end of warrants is sanctions. Any sanctions that come up through the marshalate before a final action is taken, come through my office to make sure they meet society rules, regulations. If there's anything of lasting impact outside of the marshalate, I would work with the Kingdom Seneschal on that. And this can be simple things as far as you're not allowed to fight for the next 6 months because you've caused these different safety issues, or we worked with a combatant recently that had to have one of a few individuals watch them for safety issues for a period of 6 months, just to because there had been a pattern of behavior that we wanted to correct, up to revocation of your authorizations. Those would stay within my organization. If we went further and say people couldn't show up to practices or couldn't attend events or enter tournaments, I would have to work that in conjunction with the Kingdom Seneschal. So for sanctions on the negative side of the house, it can be either completely in-house or in association with our legal representative, depending on what the issue is. That's the bad side. With regards to the officer structure, most of the things a good Earl Marshal should do is allow his deputies to do their job. That is a challenge in this kingdom because the role of the Earl Marshal has changed. I believe it was right about 5 years ago, they split it out, the Armored Marshal out from the Earl Marshal. And so people are still going to the Earl Marshal when they're needing ruling on armored activities. I redirect them to the Armored Marshal to be that first point of contact and to work with. It's a leftover thing. It will take time, but we're trying to match the society structure of having the Earl Marshal separated from that Armored Marshal. It also, because of that, it opens up a new variety of people than historically have had it. Historically, it's only been members of the Order of Chivalry. I am the first non-chivalry Earl Marshal within the Kingdom of Onsteora. I say that. I think I am. There may have been early days the case, but I doubt it, because in the early days, most of the Earl Marshal and the Seneschal were generally members of the Order of Chivalry, because the Crown wanted them to have that oath of fealty to them with regards to those activities. That culture has changed significantly since those early days. Now we're looking for better administrators in these roles than necessarily the chivalry that would do what the Crown has requested of them, even if it is against the current rules. So sometimes my job is to say no to the Crown, you cannot do that, just like the Kingdom Seneschal is required to. Those events are rare, but you have to have the capability of telling the Crown, no, you can't use that weapon. It is clearly denied by society. We are not doing an experiment. We can't start one without their approval. So we have to go through the process to do that. That's a simple example of what could happen with regards to that. Some kingdoms have had worse examples where they've tried to get people to enter a Crown tournament that didn't meet the requirements, such as membership. That comes down to a joint item between the Marshalate and the Kingdom Seneschal. Luckily, neither of us has to be the bad guy. We both get to be the bad guy. With regards to Crown Tournament, that is one of the biggest and more important roles of this office, is to make sure that that happens in association with the Kingdom Seneschal. It is how we choose our crowns, and it is required to be by armored combat according to our corporate rules. If there are some principalities that can choose them other ways than armored combat, I don't know if there are, but they are at least allowed to. But Onsteora doesn't have that at this point. And I guess with the pushing forward of the principality in the north, I will be investigating that more to make sure I have all that lined up as we make that transition. if the board approves it. With regards to Crown Tournament, the key things that must happen from the Earl Marshal's office, the first aspect of it is generally about a month beforehand, now that we are doing pre-registrations for Crown Tournament. Once we get the entrance list, the Seneschal reaches out to, sorry about that, allergies are getting to me. The Seneschal or the person designated for that activity reaches out to the Marshal Secretary to confirm that all the people who pre-registered actually are authorized combatants. The day of the tournament, if we have any last minute entries, I myself or the Marshal Secretary would do that for those who attended signed up the day of the tournament. This used to be a very difficult process when I was Kingdom Seneschal many moons ago, because we not only had to have we had to print all this out because we didn't have the system we do now. So we had a full printed roster of all the authorized fighters with this. While it is the responsibility of the combatant to do that, we do try to be polite and helpful and bring additional contact information or data for are you authorized or not. The society does not allow day authorizations any longer. Those had happened in the past. They never happened for a Crown Tournament that I'm aware of, but they've happened for other tournaments where someone is authorized just for that day. That is not something that was allowed for Crown Tournament ever, and now is not allowed society-wide for any tournament. You are either authorized to be a combatant or you are not. No more, people would call them probationary authorizations or all sorts of other things, but those are denied. During Crown Tournament, the Kingdom Seneschal, or leading up to Crown Tournament the day of, the Kingdom Seneschal does most of the activities of getting people signed in, making sure that all the legal paperwork is taking place. The Earl Marshal takes care of the field part of it, so they make sure that people are authorized, hopefully done in advance. They check the weapons, they check the armor, make sure everyone is good. They select who will be marshaling that day and approve them with regards to that. That changes throughout the day as people are dropping out of the tournament, but we start with that. Since I am the Earl Marshal currently, I am the one responsible for the entire tournament. I am the Marshal in charge. I file the report. It's the only report I file as an officer or for a tournament is that one. Otherwise, it's whichever branch officers file reports for the different ones, even if I assist with those. If there are any challenges to any of the rules or clarifications with regards to that, those go through me. We try to deal with it at the lowest level, just like we do all issues. So if there's a challenge on the field, it would go to the marshals of the field. It would then go to whoever the regional officer is, or the branch officer, if they're present, the regional, then myself, and then the Crown. We do try to keep the Crown off the field of Crown Tournament because of that, in order to have a point of appeal and to allow the process to work. But I am generally on one of the fields, but that's part of why we keep the Crown off, is that little aspect of appeals or that. I think that's it about Crown Tournament. Any questions with regards to Crown Tournament?
I have a random one.
Okay, I'll make one up.
Fantastic. Can the Earl, does this mean that the Earl Marshal cannot fight in Crown Tournament?
It does mean that there is a clarification from society on this, and it's not just with regards to the Earl Marshal. It is also in regards to the Kingdom Seneschal. If the Earl Marshal or the Kingdom Seneschal enter Crown Tournament, they are not that officer that day. They have to designate someone to hold that position. The reason for that is previously there have been people in those positions that have won the tournament, and that removes the question of was it done correctly or not, because they did not and could not have made decisions in their favor.
Makes sense.
When I became Kingdom Seneschal, the current Seneschal at the time became Princess. At the time, we did not have that rule from society. In the next 3 months, they had 4 kingdoms do the same thing. Suddenly, there was a new rule created. So yeah. So while Pug, if I entered Crown Tournament, I could enter the Crown Tournament, but I would have to designate someone to be the Earl Marshal for the day. Any other questions?
That answered it. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's not true for any of the championships or anything else. It's just in regards to Crown Tournament. Everything else is irrelevant. And I forgot to ask if there were any questions about law or sanctions. I sort of went past those without asking. All right. I actually, oh yeah, go ahead.
All right. First question on laws and sanctions. When a fighter is questioned on low calling, do we still do a court of chivalry? Is that still a thing?
Courts of chivalry still exist. It depends on the severity of the issue. Most of the time that we feel that they can be dealt with simple sanctions, but if it becomes a systemic issue that is not corrected with regular performance, we can call a court of chivalry. It's been a while since we've had one. But yes, courts of chivalry or courts of inquiry, depending on what the issue is, do still exist and can occur.
Okay.
I've actually been a panel member on a court of inquiry before for a martial activity.
Okay. My other question is towards the Crown Tournament. And you basically, as Earl Marshal, just basically make sure that you're checking armor, weapons, and everything else, and authorizations. But the group that's actually holding the event is the one that's required to set or either set up the field or provide field listable material. Is that correct?
That is correct. The branch hosting it does provide all the materials for doing the tournament. I just happen to be the marshal in charge, even though I don't physically live there. So there have been a few times the kingdom has hosted it and the kingdom has borrowed equipment from different branches to hold it. But yes, it is a branch's responsibility to provide the field, any pavilions, stuff like that.
Okay, thank you.
So that is actually all the stuff I had on my list. The things I will say, it is very important to pick your officers correctly. Lady Nicase has been amazing as my marshal secretary of being as anal retentive as I thought they would be. That has helped greatly with creating the warrant. There were certainly some challenges with the warrant when I came into the office that they have addressed and are working to address with our Kingdom Web or my Marshal Web Minister going forward as well. So thank you very much.
Welcome.
So now I will just open it up for general question and answer session on any martial type questions that could go through my office. Oh, come on, guys. Can't be that easy on me.
So how often do you post openings for offices, like whether regional or kingdom offices?
Well, oddly enough, in my first 6 months, I posted a heck of a lot because we had about 70% of the structure my lesser officers come open. That was in part due to not checking appointment dates, as well as just a general churn that happened at the same time. It is my goal to post into the Black Star only once or twice, depending on the lead time I have available. Online, I now depend on in part on the officer application coordinator. They do a monthly posting, and then I do at least one posting online. But the Black Star is the only one I'm required to do. The others, I think, just help with, given our modern society. If I don't get applicants as I'm approaching the deadline, I will then repost in order to get more attention with regards to it. So far, I've not had a challenge with that. I've gotten at least one acceptable applicant for each of the offices as they've been coming up. Something I may not have mentioned, reports are done quarterly. There's actually a standardized form, a Google form that you fill out for the Earl Marshal. It covers size of the community, how many authorized marshals, how many authorized combatants, all the aspects. It covers what experiments are going on, and then it covers any other notes that you need to make them aware of. For example, I made them aware beforehand that we were working on the reopen plan for COVID. I also communicated that through the Society Earl Marshal's mailing list, where there was some discussion with regards to that with several kingdoms. Since that was an unusual activity, I thought that important to make them aware of. And I actually called and talked to them about it just to make sure they were in the loop as we were approaching it, in case there were any concerns from society or complaints that would come up from within the kingdom.
Do you keep that up to date on a personal thing, or have you set it up to where it automatically updates?
Which thing? The COVID site? I manually update it every Friday morning.
Okay.
I have an Excel spreadsheet that generates it. I have to download a file from a national site that has all the data. So my amount of work I put into it weekly is about 5 minutes. It's really streamlined. I looked at automating it and couldn't quite get it to work. It was taking more time than it would be to actually do it manually every week. All right. Any other questions regarding the Earl Marshal? All right, I want to thank you guys for attending. As I said at the beginning, this is recorded. I will be uploading it to the Kingdom of Onsteora YouTube channel. Once I get the org chart cleaned up a little bit better and get a few more things added that I realized as I was going through this, those will be updated to the website. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Bud. Thank you for
Thanks,
doing it.
Doug.
You're welcome.